All right. Hi. Hi again. Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. My name is C.T. Tamura. And tonight we're talking about taking refuge. And it's so the book is The Path of Individual Liberation, which is from the Profound Treasury of Chogyam Trungpa, which is interesting. It doesn't actually say in the Profound Treasury on this book, but it is, right, from the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. So we're talking about chapter 10. Did anybody, so I know a few people read it. Did you read it as well? Okay, have you okay. So I really, I was talking about this before we sat down, and I feel very lucky to be able to talk about this stuff. I think it's a really wonderful chapter. And part of it is I think there's the excitement that I feel. I don't know if you guys feel this as well, but the excitement I feel about, talking about this stuff and reading it is part of, I think, also part and parcel with what we talk about when we talk about, well, he's talking about Buddha Dharma fever is his term, and taking refuge. And I think that part of that comes from excitement about the teachings and excitement about your understanding of the teachings, And I kind of do. I read this and I get excited partially because it reminds me of the fact that I see the logic, I see the understanding, some of the wisdom of the teachings and the way the practices have affected my life and my understanding of myself and the world and everything. And I'm really thankful for that knowledge. I'm thankful to have fallen onto this path, however I got there. And I think that, that's one of the things that Chogyam Trungpa starts talking about here, and is talking about Buddha Dharma fever. He's talking about he's talking about some of the enthusiasm and some of the passion that really, in a way, passion might not be the best word, but it is, some of the excitement that comes with, starting to understand the teachings, and the one other thing I'll say, and then I want to read some of this stuff because it's really the way it's written. It's hard to say it in better terms than some of the way it's written. But I also found that in my personal experience that after a certain amount of practice and study, which was several years, but it's almost like the only logical thing left to do, only thing to do, but really the next logical step was to take refuge, and was to also go and take the bodhisattva vows as well later, because it's like once you start to understand the teachings, once you start to understand the Dharma, sharing it with people is like the next thing. I don't know, at least for me, in my experience, that was very true. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, because you kind of you can't just share it all at the beginning. You kind of gotta know what you're talking about, or you gotta understand how it relates to your life and see the way it can change your life and the way you interact with the world a little bit first before you can necessarily help other people. It's like somebody was saying this was not my thing, but it's like, when you're flying a plane and they give you the instructions in the beginning, it's like, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will drop down in front of you, and please put your oxygen mask on first before helping other people with their oxygen mask. That's what it's like, right? That's basically what we're doing here too. But I feel like, taking refuge is kind of committing to, there's a commitment to both yourself and to others. Sort of like saying, I'm committing myself to being prepared, to listening to all the instructions as I prepare to fly in this airplane. I'm going to not only pay attention to the instructions, but should the time come, I will take the oxygen mask and put it on my face so that I can breathe, and then I will help other people with their oxygen masks. I don't know. That might be taking this oxygen mask thing too far. But, all right, so let me read you guys a few things because this is great. So, Buddha Dharma fever, taking refuge. When we know how best to listen to the teachings, we begin to grow up and develop as capable dharmic people. We simultaneously realize the illness of samsara and the healthiness of nirvana. We also see that we can develop the discipline to go against our habitual patterns and overcome them by means of shamatha and vipassana. This is what we're talking about, the shamatha and vipassana, the practice, coupled with who we are, our Buddha nature. It said that we all have Buddha nature and we all are essentially Buddhas, but stuff, it just kind of obscures, the ego and it just kind of obscures our view of that. And shamatha and vipassana, this meditation practice that we teach and that we just practiced, this is the way to connect with that. He goes on to say, because we have practiced and studied, the Dharma makes sense to us, and the logic of the Dharma is quite clear and precise in our mind. We realize that shopping for other kinds of spirituality is over. At that point, we look for further skillful means, or upaya. We are inspired to enter the world of Buddha Dharma by taking the Refuge Vow. It's very important to note that the practice is very key to being able to see the teachings, to finding the clarity and the wisdom in the teachings. You can't really, it's very hard to find this wisdom, to become more awake and more aware without actually practicing meditation. You can read every book you want. And the reason I point this out is because I sort of did this. My own path was that I read a book 15 years ago, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is like amazing. It was a book called Buddhism Plain and Simple by a Zen guy named Steve Hagen. I always mention this book. But it was transformative for me. I tried reading something by the Dalai Lama a little like the year before, and I didn't like it. It did not resonate with me. This book happened to resonate with me. And from that moment on, for the next six or 7 years, I read exclusively Buddhist literature. I don't think I read one book other than Buddhist literature for the better half of a decade. But the thing that was interesting about that, right, is that I was practicing a little bit as I was doing in the first few years. I would practice here and there. I would try it. Maybe I'd do it for like a week or two and then kind of fall off. But I didn't really have a disciplined practice until 5 or 6 years in. And even though I had this incredible intellectual understanding, well, not incredible, but like I had a good intellectual understanding of all this stuff I was reading, it made sense to me. But it wasn't until I sat and I started practicing regularly, and by regularly I mean every day for 6 months, that I started to really see and really understand and be able to internalize my understanding of the practice. And I think that this is, it's like the way I would compare it to people because I see a lot of times people, will come like, oh yeah, I get it. I totally get it. You're clearing your mind or whatever, people's like sort of maybe not full understandings of meditation and the Dharma are. And they're like, yeah, no, I totally get it. Like I don't meditate all the time, but I totally get it. And the way I try to explain it to them is like, that's like, it's kind of like reading lots of books on baseball. You could read a lot of books on baseball. You could know all the stats. You could like read up on hitting techniques, batting techniques, and catching techniques. But until you actually, and you could do that for years. But I pretty much guarantee you that if you read nothing but baseball books for 10 years and you step up onto a plate and have somebody throw a fastball at you, like very good chance you're going to miss that fastball. Not just the first time, not just the second time, but over and over again until you actually get the practice in, And I think that's true of anything, like riding a bike or like whatever. It's, there's no end to the amount of sort of things we can compare to that, right? We all understand that there are certain things you just can't really understand unless you do it, right? And I don't know. I think I sort of got off track a little bit. Because it's not really talking about the practice in this thing, but that's really what this is about, right? That's really what taking refuge is about. It's about recognizing the some of the truth of the teachings. It's about committing to the practice. It's realizing that, it's committing to, well, I'll tell you exactly what it's committing to. It's committing to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, right? Which is the refuge vow. The refuge vow, a person repeats, I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. So I guess the question is, what are these things? What are these things that we're taking refuge in? And why do we do it? So I've talked a little bit about that. He says this, he likes to point out, taking refuge means that you're committing yourself to the Dharma. However, it does not mean that you're asking somebody to save you in the theistic sense. And this is important. It comes up more when he's talking about taking refuge in the Dharma. This is a self-determined kind of practice and experience, right? Nobody is asking you to believe. You're really not. There's no real need for faith, as I see it. You really, all you need to do is actually sit down and do the practice, and study, And if you do those two things, you will see things for yourself. And to me, that was a revolutionary realization, because I'm not having somebody giving me a text to read and saying, believe in these things, in these stories that I'm telling you. I'm having other people, my teachers or books or however I'm sort of studying it, just say, sit down, notice these things, and learn for yourself. And that's different, that's a fundamentally different thing than a lot of the religions that we're used to. And it's interesting. Like, I wonder if, Buddhism is properly defined as a religion. And I think it is. Maybe it is properly defined as a religion, but it's a non-theistic religion, right? We're not worshiping the Buddha. The Buddha was like one of the first guys to really figure this stuff out and then pass these teachings on, And I think we get very confused with the iconography and the visual imagery and what we see happening in the East, or, like Buddhist, monks in robes, and we think it's like the Eastern equivalent of priests in robes or whatever religious apparel that we associate with here in the West. But it's different, right? It's fundamentally a bit different, and that's really important to realize. It's not a replacement for your religious beliefs. It's not a replacement for your beliefs in God or greater powers. It is a thing all to itself. It's its own practice, and it's a really practical practice that is learned from just doing it, and hopefully having a few teachers and listening to some and reading some texts. So he says, he addresses this. We take refuge in order to effect our freedom. We are willing to admit to Buddha Dharma fever. And there's two things with that. The freedom is the freedom from, I think, preset structures of belief, right? We're getting freed from the notion of walking into a situation and feeling like, well, this is how things should be, and I'm going to, I'm going to impose this structure on what's good and what's bad and what's okay and what's not, onto this situation that I've never been in before. And what we're talking about is freedom from that. Freedom, the ability to maybe experience things without a bunch of preconceptions about how they should be, and interacting with the world in an appropriate manner. seeing things for how they are rather than how we expect them to be or how we think they should be. I have to be careful because there's really, like, I'm on like the second page, and there's a lot of different stuff, but there's so much good stuff in here. It's hard not to touch on everything. But I'll read a little bit more. By taking refuge, you are trying to liberate yourself from the basic anxiety, from samsara. Now that you have found an alternative, you yearn to get away from that anxiety and negativity. You find dharmic messages quite fitting, and you begin to feel very fortunate, but that goodness has to be shared. It is good to have a jar of marmalade, but it would be better to spread it on a slice of bread and offer it to your friends to eat. So first you share the goodness with yourself, then you share it with others, but in doing so you maintain your own sense of satisfaction. In that way you become a true refugee. And that's like, this is like a much more positive way, like a metaphor than the oxygen mask, because we assume that the oxygen mask, everything is crashing down, right? And this is like, no, there's this, like, I got some marmalade, it's really good. I'm going to have a little bit, and then I want to put it on some bread and give it to you, And that's what it is. It's the same thing, right? You're saying, you gotta give it, you gotta be generous with yourself with it, right? You gotta give it to yourself, and then spread it around, share it with people. So the next section is, I think all this stuff that we were just talking about, these, this is the why. Why do we come to taking refuge? What are the conditions that start to exist when we've practiced and studied a little bit, and it starts to make sense to us? We start to see, and they're like, yeah, this idea of taking refuge starts to make sense. It's like, I want to do this. I want to continue down this path, really. And then really what we're talking about is so what does it mean to take refuge in the Buddha? What does it mean to take refuge in the Dharma and the Sangha? The Buddha, he says, when you practice shamatha, you develop your strength and your connection with Dharma. And when you practice vipassana and extend your awareness, you see how samsara works and how ugly it is. This to me is like what we were just talking about a little bit, right? Which is the practice of shamatha and vipassana. This is how we connect to the Buddha, right? This is how we connect to our own Buddha nature, right? This is the idea of underlying this is the idea that we are all Buddhas. We're all enlightened beings underneath the grime that kind of ego and kind of gets in the way of. And through the practice, we start to connect to that. And taking refuge in the Buddha, in some ways, is basically saying that you are taking refuge in yourself, in a way, right? It's almost like saying that I'm putting forth a belief that in Buddha nature, I'm taking a belief in the knowledge and the wisdom that is sort of inherent to me, to all beings, and to me as an individual. I've glimpsed, maybe it's like I've glimpsed the nature. I've glimpsed Buddha nature. I have some understanding. I have some experience of the Buddha within me, the Buddha within everyone, the interconnectedness maybe of all things, right? And I want to take refuge in that. I want to dedicate myself to that. I think that's a lot of what we're saying when we're saying we take refuge in the Buddha. It's not saying I take refuge in the God Buddha and that God Buddha is going to bestow upon me enlightenment. That's not what it is. And I think a lot of people confuse it for that. He talks a little bit too about how to share with others. And I just got to share this too. Obviously, you should not immediately try to liberate others without first making your own commitment to the Dharma. To begin with, your own intentions need to be pure and clean. If you yourself become less of a nuisance and produce less garbage, then you can begin to help clear out somebody else's garbage. That is why you take the refuge vow, your vow that you will always clean up after yourself, your vow that you will not distort the world you are living in with your own contributions of pollution. Your own pollution might seem quite small considering the largeness of the world, but your contribution of not polluting the world could be quite powerful. If all of us cleaned up after ourselves, we could create a completely immaculate world. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, John Lennon was an enlightened being. You know, the song Imagine, right? Imagine all the people living, life is one, you know, like this is a truth. This is a fundamental truth that John Lennon, the Beatles put forth into the world. This is why there's a plaque on the Upper West Side in the middle of Central Park that says "Imagine" on it. Not just because he died there, but also because there's an inherent truth to this, right? There's an inherent truth to the fact that if we could all go through our lives and clean up our garbage, right? Which means like to work with our mental baggage, to not inflict suffering into the world and onto other people. If we could all do that individually, which we can, right? You would have essentially heaven on earth. You would have a perfect world in a way, right? And maybe that perfect world kind of exists and we just have to see it. But the idea is that is there. It's possible. It's possible. And it's based on our choices as individuals collectively. I don't know. I don't know. I just read that and I couldn't help but think like if I could have a soundtrack right now, I'd just be playing Imagine by the Beatles. And we could like hold hands and sing. So anyway, okay. Sorry, that was just the thing that I always like whenever I see pop, like ways that this relates to pop culture and ways that like we're all kind of familiar with. I like to point those out because I think that there's a lot of wisdom in pop culture that we don't necessarily always see, but it's there. The next section is talking about letting go of theism, and this kind of relates to taking refuge in the Sangha. In the Dharma, in the teachings. And let me read this. With both theism and monotheism, it is possible to fall into extremes. In the extreme of theism, although you desire salvation, you think it can only be achieved by some greater power that exists outside of you. Excuse me. In the extreme of non-theism, you think you can achieve salvation by hard work alone, purely by yourself. Instead of falling into such extremes, you should join together your effort and energy to try and be awake. As he's just saying, it's up to us. But like, it's helpful also, I think, to accept, to not only put your own effort into it, but also we have to take the teachings and we have to work with them. We have to allow like ourselves to come to the teachings in such a way that we are open to them and can learn from them, because people have gone through before and done this. And he goes on to talk about exactly that. That is why the Buddhist practice is called non-theistic, because you don't have to rely on any aids. Nobody is going to jolt you except your own mind. And that's your own mind experience. That's what happens when we sit and practice. That's what happens when we practice shamatha and vipassana, when we practice mindfulness awareness. It is important to realize that when we take refuge in the Buddha, we are not viewing Buddha as a god. Many writers have misunderstood this. I think that's very true of all non-Buddhist writers. That what's the Siddhartha, right? Siddhartha is by who's it by? Hermann Hesse. So, like I remember reading that. If you guys have, it sounds like everybody's read this, but and I remember being like, oh, let me read it. And this was more recently, after I kind of studied a lot of Buddhism, and And I was like, I read it and I was kind of like, it sounds like a Western guy who doesn't really understand Buddhism, and was kind of like, but was a smart, perceptive guy, and sort of wrote down his observations of what he thought was going on, and not really understanding it fully, And I think that was a really good example. It is important to realize the non-theistic basis of Buddhist practice, particularly if you go on to study the Vajrayana with its iconography of deities such as Yidams, Harikas, Dakinis, Dharmapalas, and the rest. We do not consider that such deities have any external manifestation. They are purely within as non-manifested manifestations. That is to say, it's not theistic, right? That is just saying what I was saying before, right? About the Buddha. So, talking further about devotion and humbleness. So, humbleness is a very important thing. Humbleness is really a key to taking refuge in the Dharma, because it's not without humility you can't really learn what the teachings are trying to teach you, right? And he says humbleness rouses you to give birth to realization because it allows you to hear and experience the teachings properly. With humbleness, your whole being is completely empty, waiting for the teachings to enter into you. If you are arrogant, you couldn't care less about what you hear or see. He then goes on to say, this is the best wealth this is an example of arrogance, okay? And it reminds me very much of someone in our political sphere right now. This is the best wealth I've ever had. It's the best collection of logic, knowledge, and wisdom. I am carrying so much wisdom. It's huge. And then it goes on, obviously, to say that people with that kind of attitude probably should meditate a little bit more, which I would probably agree with. With humbleness, on the other hand, you could develop prajna, wisdom, joy, and renunciation. In order for Dharma to enter into your system, you have to bring along less baggage. And again, the baggage, I mentioned it a little bit before, but the baggage, I really like to compare this to the idea of a full cup or an empty cup, right? And the thing is if you have an empty cup, if you have a full cup, you can't put anything into it. It's full. You don't have room for new beliefs or new ideas or new teachings, right? So you kind of have to empty your cup in order to be able to receive knowledge and wisdom, teachings, right? And so that's what this humbleness is about, and it's very, very key to taking refuge in the Dharma, because the Dharma is ready and waiting for you to be empty, to be open and humble enough to be able to receive the teachings that you're getting. I have this, talking about pop culture, I have this great little thing I want to show you guys. I know it's going to be small, but so we were talking about this earlier. So has everyone seen the movie Avatar? Yeah. You all saw the movie Avatar? I can put it. So there's a scene. Let me just set it up. Okay, so this guy Jake Sully has been put into a body of this alien. The alien planet, right, is all, it's like very harmonious place. It's a primitive place. There's so much, they've discovered that it's all one living organism. The planet itself is all completely interconnected, which is, I assume that James Cameron read some Buddhist stuff before he came to this, or maybe not, who knows. And so he's taken on an avatar. He's actually in an artificial body, and he's trying to come to the natives and become part of their tribe. And the natives are fighting with the humans, because the humans are trying to rape and pillage the planet and extract these minerals that are valuable to them. But in the process of doing it, they're destroying the planet. So he comes to the elder of the tribe, and he asks to be made into a part of the tribe. And let me just turn up the volume here. And this is what she says.
Why did you come to us?
Came to learn.
We have tried to teach all the sky people. It is hard to fill a cup which is already full.
Why did you come to us? To learn. It is hard to fill a cup that is already full. And that's what this is about. That's what humbleness is about. And that's where, I don't know, James Cameron is apparently an enlightened being at times. He wrote it when he was a kid, this movie, and then didn't make it until the technology was available. So anyway, half, or not half empty, half full, but the idea of this cup, we are vessels, right? We are containers where we absorb information when we're kids, and all throughout our lives, hopefully we learn and grow, and the only way to do that is with the humility of not already knowing what everything. If you know everything, then you can't learn anything. So in a way, right, we're kind of trying to, it's almost like, let's empty our cups and fill it up with some Buddha juice. Really, maybe we could say Dharma juice, right? But I don't know. I like Buddha juice more. So in a way, taking refuge, right? We're trying to fill our cups with Buddha juice. So, okay. Also, talking about taking refuge in the Sangha. The Sangha there's such great support, right? It's such a great thing to have people that are on the path with you, that are at various stages in the path, right? Their own path. But you have teachers and even teachers are students, oftentimes, most of the time. And you just have this wealth of collective knowledge from the people that are studying and walking the path around you. And really, it's like you can't ask for better people to sort of walk the path together. It's sort of like we walk individually, but we walk together. It's kind of seems like a beginning of like some sort of Zen koan or something, right? It's like it seems to not exactly make sense. But the path is our own, right? We have to walk our path, but there are other people walking it too, and there's great stuff to be learned from that and gained from that in our endeavors to understand. Let me just read this last part because it's very good. Taking refuge in the Buddha as an example, we realize that we do not need any external deity. He's kind of summarizing some of the stuff. We realize that we have Buddha nature and fundamental excellence is within us already. Taking refuge in the Dharma, we realize that we do not need to listen to any doctrines taught in the name of ego clinging, ego fixation, or ego improvement. Taking refuge in the Sangha, we realize that the companionship of brothers and sisters in the Dharma, sitting and practicing together, is the best companionship. We do not need to look for better friends. I think it's okay if we have friends that are not in the Sangha, but Sangha friends are special, right? And some of that specialness comes from that shared desire, right? That shared desire to take refuge, that shared desire to study, to practice. And hopefully some shared understanding too. Because you don't always get that in your life outside the Sangha. Even with the people that you work with or the people that you date. They might, you may have that or you may not. But the Sangha, you will find people to relate to about the Dharma and about the Buddha. All right, and the last thing. In taking refuge and becoming known as refugees, we are liberating ourselves independently on our own. because we have humbleness and an absence of pride, because we are empty cups. We begin to experience delight in what we have done. Because of the commitment we have made, our awareness begins to expand. We have discovered something worthy of taking refuge in, worthy of bowing to. With our palms joined at the level of our heart, we bow to those who have gone before us and experienced enlightenment. Such ancestors include anyone who has transmitted sanity to us, whatever the lineage or tradition, like James Cameron, John Lennon. That is what it means to discover the dwelling place of the ancestors. Now let's get us some Buddha juice. I added that last part in. I added the Buddha juice part in. So I think that's it. I think that's a good little chat about taking refuge. Certainly not everything. I feel like you could talk about this. I mean, it touches on every aspect of the path, this chapter and this topic, right? So you could talk about it ad infinitum. But I think that's good for tonight. So, does anybody have any questions?
I had a few atheist friends, and I was talking Buddhism with them, and they were saying that if they were to believe in anything, that would be closest to Buddhism. So I think, but it's just that nothing about creation thing in Buddhism at all?
I don't know. I don't know all the. I don't really know all the details of that. What I can say is that, atheism, and sometimes I don't know if are you talking about atheists, people who actively don't believe in God, or are you talking about agnostics who don't know whether they think
they
God
don't
exists?
believe in God?
They don't. So atheists. Yeah, I think that the thing that I would say is that there's certainly nothing incompatible with Buddhist practice and teachings with atheism, except that you would probably say that you need to let go of those beliefs that you're clinging to, which is the idea that you think that God actively doesn't exist. And that is a belief very similar to a religious belief of the saying, well, God does exist, And what Buddhism asks you to do is kind of let go of these preconceived structures that you're trying to impose on the world and just sit and observe how things are. Be more aware of it. So I think...
How's the universe created in Buddhism?
So yeah, John may be able to explain this better than I, but the thing I would say is that it kind of, like in a way, it doesn't really matter. Just sit and observe how the world is, It's like, try and experience the world as it is, rather than trying to figure out, I don't know. It depends on whether you can. There's nothing wrong with scientific inquiry. There's nothing wrong with spiritual inquiry as well, but it's really not about. It's not about that. It's really about now, here and now, and being awake with what's happening, I think. Would you like to add to the Buddhist creation myths?
Yeah, the Buddha said that there are questions that do not tend to edification. They don't help us. And I suspect that that's one of them. But I can't remember what they all are. The whole thing also in Buddhism, they say that words regarding any kind of verbal formulation is just a useful way to take things. That the truth, the real truth, the absolute truth, is ineffable. It's beyond words. And so, any belief or formulation is not absolutely true at all.
It's inherently limiting.
It's just a convenient, useful way for some people at some time to take things in order for them to get to what is ultimately beyond any verbal formulation. And so in Buddhism they say don't subscribe to any particular statement, any affirmation about the way things are, or whether God exists or does not exist, and don't do that. It's not useful. Maybe it's useful sort of temporarily, expediently for some people at a particular time and place, but it's certainly not the real truth, which is has nothing to do with or is beyond words.
And it goes along with what we were talking about before, this idea of letting go of structures. Like, it's every time we try and define something, we try and define all that is, we're trying to impose a language conceptual structure on something that doesn't necessarily lend itself to that, right? And I think that's very important to understand. Is you're falling into the same trap. It just has a different face on it. A conceptual trap, a trap of this is how things are created, and this is why they are the way they are, and this is why the way they operate. And if something doesn't fit into that structure, it creates confusion and anxiety. Yeah. Yeah. Has it? Yeah. For sure.
I wanted to add something more about the taking refuge. Well, the way I always understood it was that we take refuge in the Buddha as an example of a real human being that lived on this earth. He wasn't a god. He wasn't supernatural. He was just an ordinary person who really worked with himself. And we can actually do it too. That's the thing. That's the difference between a non-theistic point of view and a theistic point of view, is that a theistic point of view is that someone out there is going to save us. But from a non-theistic point of view, the Buddha said that everyone has the Buddha nature. That means the enlightened gene that's within our hearts, let's say. And because he had it, he could wake up. And because we have it, we can wake up. And then what he did was he gave instructions on how to wake up. And that's the path. And the path is the Dharma, the teachings that he taught on how to do that, the practices that he gave, meditation. And then the Sangha is the third jewel. The first jewel is the Buddha as the example. The second jewel is the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha on how to do it. And then the third jewel is the Sangha, the community of practitioners who work together. Not that we all are alike. We're not alike, we're individuals, but we work together as a group. We practice individually, but we practice together as a group. And we can therefore support each other in our Dharma practice. A lot of people say we take refuge in the Guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Guru could be your own personal teacher, is your own personal teacher. So for instance, some of us have studied with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and we took refuge with him, and he became our Guru, our teacher. So we took refuge in the Guru, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And that's where you start.
I think I like I think that there's a sense of really giving in, right? Like really giving up the things that we cling to, like in order to take refuge, right? There's a letting go of the ego clinging is the best way to describe it, right?
Well, what Rinpoche said was that when you become a refugee, when you take refuge, you give up your cozy little cocoon or your nest or your home, and you go out into the world, which is the path.
Yeah, I would, and I've seen this in my life many times, both in myself and in other people, and it's a funny use of the term refuge in modern society, because we think of refuge as like, well, I'm going to go into I'm going to go into my church and take refuge there. I'm going into my home and taking refuge there. But we're really talking about taking refuge from the things that imprison us, from the things that impose structure, right? And there's, people in my life that I've seen, I think we probably all know people who have very strict ideas about how things are supposed to be. They want the world to be black and white, and this is what's right and this is what's wrong, and they have this structure. But that structure, this belief structure, can act like a cage, right? It keeps you boxed in and not really able to interact with the world in a way, because if the world is sort of ever changing and new and different, but the structure doesn't, like belief structures sometimes don't allow for everything. And it's like the refuge that we're taking refuge to get away from those structures, those mental structures that we impose on ourselves, our beliefs, and I think that's that's an important aspect of it. There's a sense of just really giving into it, letting go. Yeah.
Yeah, the beliefs that bind us. But one thing that I remember that the Vidyadhara said about the birth of ego, and in a way you could think of it as sort of like creating a world. That at some point, like millions of years ago, someone kind of like had a little belief that they really existed, and from that, samsara grew out from that, and created into this really big belief in that we really do exist. And when that happens, that is kind of like a creation of the birth of ego.
Yeah.
Which causes tremendous amount of suffering and pain.
And along those lines, right, that's what this is. It's a creation of a structure. Ego is really the creation of a belief structure, And I think that's, perfect example, very blunt example of that kind of structure creation that I feel like it obviously can get more nuanced than this, but it's like, let's take a commandment, one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not steal, right? This is a structure we want to impose on, like, that's one of the 10 commandments. This is a biggie. Thou shalt not steal. Well, in like high school or like middle school, like ethics class, I don't know if they do ethics classes in middle school, but in high school, right, we would take ethics classes and say, well, what happens if there's somebody stealing to feed their family? And their family is starving, and if they don't steal something, their family is going to starve, Then suddenly, thou shalt not steal. It's really like, well, maybe thou shalt not steal, except when you really need to, when you're really helping people out, right? And you can see how by simply blindly adhering to that conceptual structure, that this is right and this is wrong, it doesn't necessarily allow for the reality of the world, for the nuances of situations, for the myriad of endless situations that you can find yourself in. And by letting go of those structures, we can actually become free to interact with ourselves and the world around us in a genuine and skillful way, right? One that doesn't necessarily cause more suffering, but it isn't bounded by limited ideas. I think that's very much what we're taking refuge from, the limited ideas. the limited structures. So, I think with that, maybe we will call it an evening. Unless anybody has any other burning questions? No? Okay. All right. Yes, should we dedicate the merit? I think we can dedicate the merit. This seems appropriate to dedicate the merit in the context of taking refuge vows. So, most people here understand, but I'll explain for people. Yeah. Yeah, so we are planning, I don't know if you guys know, but we are planning on giving refuge vows to people who are interested. Yes, please. Thank you. And does anybody else need? Okay. We are planning on giving refuge vows, so that's part of the reason for the talk this week. And then next week, you John Baker, are going to talk about more. I forget, what is the next chapter? You dig into the vows and stuff, the 3 jewels, right? Okay, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So I guess in a way, maybe I was precocious in terms of my talking about this stuff. Okay. This was supposed to be more of an overview, but I'm sure you will have all kinds of good stuff. So what we do, typically is in true Buddhist fashion here, we're trying to spread the marmalade around, right? So we got this marmalade, we got the teachings, right? And this is good stuff. So we want to take a little for ourselves, and then we want to spread it on the bread and give it out to other people. So that's what we're doing when we say the dedication of merit. So let's just go with it. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Let's get some Buddha juice.